What if events went differently? What if the Destroyer killed Thor? Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the Multiverse, to another brand new Marvel's What If episode. And in today's highly requested Marvel's What If, we're going to be going over what if Thor was taken out earlier in the MCU timeline? What if the Destroyer managed to kill Thor before he got his powers back in the first installment? What do you think would happen to the rest of the MCU timeline with the absence of Thor? Especially the absence of Thor in the Avengers films, as Thor was a key role within those movies. It would be very interesting to see what those characters would do without him, especially with Loki and the rest of Avengers 2012. But that being said, my fellow watchers, the time for talk is over, and I cannot wait to finally get into this Marvel's What If episode. Location, Midgard. Time, 4:27 p.m. Thor could not still believe how the past events had turned out. He was a god, for crying out loud, and he should not be subjected to circumstances like this, he told himself. Thor was currently on Earth, what he and other Norse entities called Midgard. Thor was banished to Earth by his father, Odin, and it seemed unbelievable to Thor, even though Odin stated that this was a way to punish Thor for his past actions. He still did not see how it made sense. In his own view, the punishment far outweighed his actions. In a futile attempt to see how his actions matched the punishment from his dad, Thor went down memory lane, to the day Odin punished him by banishment. Location, Odin's throne room, Asgard. Thor was at the throne room of Odin, and he was pretty shaken. If Odin had not come when he did to rescue them from the frost giants, Thor was sure that there would have been some casualties on their part, and potential war. Thor had gone to combat the frost giants, and the leader of the frost giants, in order to get back the casket of winter's winds. Loki had helped him in gaining their location, and Thor quickly went with the Warriors 3 alongside Sif. The frost giants had sneaked in to steal the casket of winter winds. Just when Thor was about to ascend the throne, their actions caused Thor's ascension ceremony to get cancelled, and that was why he was out for vengeance. The frost giants had made it very personal. Immediately, Thor had gotten there. The battle began, and they were overwhelmed. Just in the nick of time, Odin swooped in and saved them. It was embarrassing for Thor that he needed to be saved by his father, but he knew deep down that they really needed the help. Thor decided to swallow his pride and appreciate his father for rescuing them, but Odin's reaction was shocking to him. Odin rebuked him for being hot-headed and too harsh, rushing into action without even thinking. Thor was infuriated, but he maintained his rage and kept a calm front. This was until Odin declared that he was unfit to be king. This caused a massive reaction from Thor, but he was quickly calmed by Odin. Odin stated that Thor's punishment would be banishment. When Thor heard his punishment, he was bewildered, and he was about to start a riot when Odin was having none of it. Odin quickly banished him to Midgard, and he sent Mjolnir with him. Odin, however, sent Thor's hammer with a catch, a new condition. The condition was that the hammer would only be lifted if used by anyone who was worthy. Odin sincerely hoped that Thor would learn his lesson on Midgard. Location, Midgard. Time, 4:46 p.m. Now, Thor was stranded in Midgard, and he had lost the worst and most humiliating experience of his life. He had been rescued by Jane Foster, her mentor, Selvig, and her friend, Darcy. After Thor had been found by them, he got a whiff of the news about his hammer. Apparently, it had become sort of a world wonder now, as people were coming around town to try and lift it. The idea had made Thor chuckle because he knew that mere mortals could not lift his hammer. Thor then decided that he would get his hammer back. Once he got Mjolnir back, he would gain his powers back, and after that, he would head to Asgard. The only thing Thor did not know was that Odin had enchanted his hammer. Thor went all the way to S.H.I.E.L.D's encampment. He snuck in through their security systems just to get his hammer. S.H.I.E.L.D. had recently started studying the hammer, as it was an otherworldly metal, and no one could seem to lift it. Nick Fury thought it would advance Earth's technology, and studying it could also help them find its origins. Once Thor got within the proximity of the hammer, Nick Fury became alerted of his presence, and Barton already had him at crosshairs. Nick Fury, however, was curious about why someone would come all the way to take multiple risks just to lift a hammer. Nick Fury was also curious about whether Thor would be successful to lift the hammer, as S.H.I.E.L.D., with all its technology, could not move the hammer one bit. It was this reason that made Nick Fury tell Barton to stand down. Thor was all smiles when he saw his hammer, but when he tried to lift it, he failed. He started weeping in pain and agony as he realized what his father had done. Nick Fury was disappointed, and he deduced that Thor was not the one. He quickly ordered him to be locked up. As Thor was being dragged to his cell, he wondered what Heimdall's reaction would be in this moment. Thor, the god of thunder, and rightful heir of Asgard, being dragged away as a common man. How amusing, Thor said to himself, sadly. During Thor's trial and his punishment, if Odin and Thor were not focusing on themselves, they would not have noticed that Loki had a slight cunning smile on. Loki was the one that secretly let Loki and the Frost Giants into Asgard. It was because of him that they were able to steal the casket of winter winds. After the trial, Loki was ecstatic, as it meant that Thor was out of his way, for now. Loki, however, due with his own surprises, as he got to find out the hard way that Odin was not his biological father. Loki discovered that he was born by the Frost Giants, and that Loki was actually his real father. Loki wasted no time in confronting Odin with the new information. Loki felt like the whole world had shifted from under him, that he had been living a lie his whole life. He just hoped that Odin would set everything right, that there would be a very logical explanation for everything. Even though this is a new revelation for him, belonging to the Frost Giants would explain his enchantment powers. He still did not want to believe it. He marched into his father's quarters and confronted him with the information. When Loki had asked Odin whether it was true that he was just an adopted son, he looked closely at his supposed dad's face. Loki was an excellent reader of expressions, and he knew when people lied. However, the expression that Loki found in Odin's face was surprising. After Loki had confronted the king of Asgard about his heritage, Odin quickly went into his Odin sleep. At first, Loki did not know what to make of this. He questioned himself whether it was just a chance and coincidence or pure shock and terror of his confrontation about his heritage, and that made Odin go to sleep. Whatever it was, Loki had surely hit the gold mine. His mind had already abandoned the feeling of betrayal and grief of being just an adopted son. Loki's mind now raced with the limitless opportunities and possibilities that he could capitalize on. Now that Odin was in his sleep, Thor was banished and Odin was currently indisposed. This now meant that by right, Loki would be the lawful ruler of Asgard. This discovery made Loki laugh in extreme joy. The first thing that Loki sought out to do was make sure that Odin did not wake up from his sleep again. In order to do this, Loki decided that he would meet with his biological father. Accepting the fact that he was truly one of the Frost Giants and not an Asgardian broke something in Loki. It might have just broken the last barrier that was protecting what he had left of his humanity. Without wasting much time, Loki set out to carry out his plans. Location: Midgard. Earth is actually not so bad of a place, Thor told himself, as he started liking it here. After S.H.I.E.L.D. had arrested him, Dr. Selvig had helped him to get out. Thor then accepted the fact that he might never get to see Asgard again. His new resolve made him quickly accept his fate, and he started amusing the culture of Earth. He found their traditions and technology intriguing. One person that intrigued him the most was Jane Foster. Thor noticed that he had started developing feelings of affection for her, and he didn't know how he should take it in. Thor just knew that the longer that he stayed in Midgard, the less strength he would have to push his feelings aside. Little did Thor know that his time at Midgard was coming to an end. The whole of Asgard was under Loki's control, and he loved it. Loki had, however, heard whispers of people that were very unhappy with his rule. Naturally, they were scared to say it to his face. The recent information that Loki heard, however, made him worried. Loki heard the Warriors 3 and Sif were planning to bring back Thor. Loki knew that Thor's presence would truly complicate things. This was because Thor, the rightful heir to the throne, would quickly usurp up all the power that Loki had gotten over Asgard. Loki then concluded that no matter what, Thor must not be allowed back into Asgard. Loki could not allow for his plans to be destroyed so quickly. Loki had already contacted Loki into killing Odin and getting back the casket of winter winds. As Loki was seated on Odin's throne, contemplating his next move, he was informed that the Warriors 3 and Sif had already gone to Heimdall. This was for him to send them to Midgard to get Thor. Loki quickly swung into action as he prayed his plan would work. When Loki got to Heimdall's post, he saw that his plan had come to fruition. Loki had brought over Sif, and it was quite easy. Loki knew that she had romantic feelings for Thor, and he just showed her exaggerated scenes of him, and the human girl on Midgard called Jane. Loki had used his enchantment to make up the scenes, and this made Sif heartbroken. Loki had then promised Sif his heart, and a place at his side, if she helps him spy on the Warriors 3, because they were the only significant position to his rule. Sif had reluctantly agreed, and Loki was glad that she did, because now, the Warriors 3 laid unconscious at her feet. It was all an elaborate trap, planned by Loki and Sif. Loki knew that they would make their move to escape soon, so he planted multiple soldiers at Heimdall's post. At Sif's signal, they had ambushed and knocked out the Warriors 3. Loki then ordered them to take and lock them away. As they left, Sif came towards him, but she noticed he was still unsettled. She inquired what the problem was. Loki told her that as long as the option of Thor was still present, other groups would still try and get him back. Sif's warm expression grew stiff and cold at the mention of the god's name. "So what do you suggest we do?" she asked. Loki thought for a moment, and then he grinned so menacingly that it scared Sif. "Thor needs to be destroyed," Loki told Sif. A few moments later, Loki activated the destroyer to terminate Thor, once and for all. Thor was having a meal with Jane Foster when the destroyer attacked. Thor did not stand a chance. The destroyer wasted no time. Thor looked at the destroyer and closed his eyes as it blasted Thor with heat rays. The pure force of the blast made Thor crash through walls. The destroyer slowly but precisely made its way to Thor. Thor tried to crawl away, but he couldn't. The destroyer caught up with Thor and started plummeting him with punches. Thor knew that the end was near, as he could not summon his hammer, and nobody was coming to his aid. As the destroyer lifted up his foot to smash Thor's head in, a bullet deflected off his skin. Jane Foster had gotten a gun in a bid to defend Thor. The bullet did not harm the destroyer, but it annoyed him. He quickly turned his attention to Jane Foster, as it readied himself to blast her. Jane was soon to be blown into smithereens, but she stared at the destroyer in defiance. As he blasted her, Thor used the last ounce of his strength to push her out of the way. This made Thor take the full impact of the blast. The destroyer then swiftly kicked Thor away, as it discarded him as dead. The destroyer now had its sights on Jane Foster, who was currently weeping for Thor. What the destroyer did not know was that Thor still had a little breath left within. When he saved Jane by taking her place, he became worthy again. He stretched out his burnt and bloodied arm, and Mjolnir came flying to him. Thor knew that he might not have time for the hammer's arrival, so he used his last breath and told the hammer to protect Jane Foster. After that, Thor was blasted into smithereens. Thor passed away. The destroyer was oblivious to Thor's activities, as he had already caught up to Jane. It readied its heatwave blast to end her once and for all, when Mjolnir came flying to her hand. The result was a lightning strike, and suddenly, Jane was clad in Thor's armor. She was now beaming with power. She was now the goddess of thunder. The destroyer was pushed away by the blast, but it still advanced at Jane Foster as it sensed that she was inexperienced. Jane, however, readied for him, as she put in all her might and swung the hammer at the destroyer. It blasted it to smithereens. After the battle, Jane ran to Thor's ashes and broke down in tears. She finally now believed all his talk of being a god, but it was too late. She wept for the destroyed possible life that she might have had with him. Jane remembered Thor saying something to Heimdall, and if her memory of Norse mythology served her right, she knew he was the protector of the Bifrost. Casting her teary eyes towards the heavens, Jane cried out to Heimdall to let her bring Thor's ashes home, and he obliged. The Bifrost surrounded Jane, and Thor's ashes were pulled up to Asgard. Location: Asgard. Loki felt a strange emotion in his body, and it was overwhelming. Loki thought that he would never feel the emotions again, that he had gotten rid of it forever. The emotion was grief. He just got wind of the news that Thor had been turned into ash by the destroyer. At first he was in disbelief, but he confirmed the news. Loki was in absolute pain. He did not really think that Thor would die, because that was how the game went. Loki and Thor had a sort of game going on, even though none of them would acknowledge its existence. The nature of the game was like Loki would try to kill Thor, but would fail miserably. After that, Thor would come and destroy whatever evil plans Loki had. Loki did not ever think that the destroyer would permanently kill Thor. The news of Thor's death completely disabled Loki. It was as if a very vital part of his existence was destroyed too. First, it was the news of my adoption by Asgard, and now my brother's death. Loki asked himself, as he did not know what his true purpose in life was again. Loki knew that one thing, however, was for sure, that he would never remain the same again. That day, Odin awoke from his Odin sleep, and when he got the news of Thor's death, his heart broke. Everyone expected Loki to run, but they got information that he was at the Bifrost. When Odin got there with multiple soldiers to apprehend him, they were met with a frightening sight. Loki sat at the edge of an already destroyed Bifrost, weeping. Apparently, he had destroyed the frost giants, including his biological father, by destroying the bridge as they crossed on to kill Odin in his sleep. Loki did not show any signs of opposition as the Asgardian soldiers arrested him. He could not even bring up his head to face Odin and his mother. Loki was then locked in the deepest dungeon prison of Asgard, at the command of Odin. During the trial, Loki did not utter a word. After the burial ceremony, there was the matter of whether Jane Foster would still carry Mjolnir. Odin decided that since it was the last wish of his son, that she would remain with the hammer and its powers. She was however mandated to spend time at Asgard to hone her skills. Odin had also made the decision, as he thought that it would be nice to open relations with the people of Midgard, and Jane Foster would be the face of it. Even though the pain of Thor's death was still fresh in their minds, they decided to move on. The Warriors 3 were promoted in Odin's army, and they helped Jane Foster in her training. Jane Foster was a fast learner and she grew in her skills tremendously. Everything was going smooth for months, as only one minor issues and battles ensued over the 9 realms, until the Dark Elves problem arose. This was the first challenge for Jane, and even though she was not ready for its consequences it brought. It was 2 years after the death of Thor, and life was going good for Jane Foster. Jane, alongside the Warriors 3 and Sif, were just back from a mission at Vitenham. This was the home of their comrade Hogun. The Bifrost had finally been reconstructed and they made their final battle. After they had arrived, Odin informed every one of them about the convergence. In his words, he stated that it was a rare alignment of the 9 realms, and portals which linked the worlds would appear at random as the events approached. Jane had thought nothing of it until she reached Earth the next day. She discovered that her assistant, Darcy Lewis, had gone off to investigate some strange sightings, and she had absorbed the ether. Jane had quickly rushed her to Asgard, but was met with opposition from Odin, that the ether was dangerous, a doom prophecy. He also added that it would kill Darcy. Jane was downcast as she did not know what to do. Jane could not lose her best friend too. Even though Darcy was her intern, she was the closest thing Jane had to a friend. Foster quickly decided that she had one last option to explore. Even though it was not easy for her, she decided that she had to ask for Loki's help, as he had heard the other Asgardians and the Warriors 3 talking about his expertise in enchantment. Taking a deep breath, Jane went into the deepest part of Asgard's dungeon to seek Loki's help. It was at this time period that the Dark Elves attacked. Malekith had been in suspended animation for thousands of years, along with the surviving Dark Elves. They had been conquered by Bor, Odin's father, but they had escaped his grasp. And now that the ether was released and absorbed by Darcy, they had awoken to retrieve it. They were currently on their way to Asgard. Their technology was better than that of the Asgardians, even so that they could conceal their ship from Heimdall's vision himself. Once they were detected by the Asgardians, it was too late, as one of their ships broke through the city's boundaries. At the cost of all others, Malekith's right-hand man, Algrim, who became the Cursed, was their triumph card in this battle. They moved like a wrecking ball and destroyed everything in their path. Malekith knew that they had to retrieve the ether and leave before Asgard got back their wit. In a short time, they made it to the Queen's room, as they sensed that they had the ether present there. However, when they arrived, Darcy was nowhere to be found. Frigga had actually used her enchantment to lure them to her room, and they were pissed. Algrim moved to stab her, but Malekith stopped him. He had a better plan. Jane Foster, on the second thought, had brought Darcy with her on her secret quest to see Loki. Because of the depth of the dungeon, they were oblivious to the invasion of the Dark Elves. Once they saw Loki, he was a mere shadow of what he once was. Loki was reduced to a frail and sickly-looking god. When Jane Foster made her request to him, she was met with no response. This got her angry and she was about to rant and scream at him, but then she got interrupted by new visitors. Malekith and Algrim had come down to the dungeon, and Queen Frigga was dangling in the air and struggling in pain as her neck was being held by the Cursed. Once Loki saw his adoptive mother in pain, something inside of him clicked. For a long time, he had felt nothing, and he figured out that if he wanted to redeem himself, he had to perform a good deed. Jane Foster, almost as impulsive and hot-headed as Thor, rushed into battle and threw her hammer at the elves. Algrim the Cursed just swatted it aside, and it destroyed the cell of Loki. The Dark Elves asked for Darcy in exchange for the Queen's life. Jane was still in rage and about to rush at them again, but Loki stopped her. He placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered in her ears. "Trust me," Loki said. His voice was so raspy that it sent shivers down Jane's spine. She decided to trust him even though she was still cautious. Loki saw a portal manifesting itself slowly, but surely behind the Dark Elves, and they were completely oblivious to it. This all but confirmed that he was doing the right thing. For the first time in a long while, Loki's head and heart was clear and determined. He knew what he needed to do. He needed to protect his mother, Asgard, and Jane Foster. Loki did not know if he had enough time, but once his mind was set towards protecting Jane, he became worthy of the hammer. Wasting no more time, he proceeded to do what he knew, and that was talk. Loki struck a deal with the elves. They returned Frigga, and Loki gave them Darcy to remove the ether from her. Malekith wasted no time as he knew that time was running out, and they needed to escape Asgard. Once Malekith removed the ether from Darcy, he moved to retrieve it, and he knew that he had been tricked. Loki used his illusion to cloud the location of the ether. Malekith and Algrim screamed in rage, but suddenly they saw a manifestation of Loki, and though him to be real, they rushed at him, but far too late. They discovered that it was another illusion Loki had allured them to, out of Asgard through a portal that appeared behind them because of the convergence. The portal was now closing rapidly, and they rushed to jump back to retrieve the ether. Loki knew that he could not let that happen. He knew that this was the end of the line for him. Loki turned back and looked at his mom, Frigga, and mouthed the words, "I am sorry." After this, Loki channeled all the enchantment that he had left. He drew every power left from his life. Because of his determination to also protect Jane Foster, Mjolnir leapt into his hand, and he was granted the powers of Thor too. Loki kept through the portal in order to intercept Malekith and Algrim, who wanted to re-enter Asgard to get the ether. Loki screamed in pain as the power he was wielding far outweighed him. Loki struck them, and he disintegrated Malekith and Algrim with one final blow. The entire world they were in was destroyed. The portal swiftly closed, and it stopped the blast from entering Asgard. When Jane summoned the hammer, Loki did not return with it. Frigga wept as she knew that Loki was gone. He will be given a hero's funeral because he died a hero, she said. This day of Asgard wept that day, but Odin was the most memorable of all, because he had lost his only two sons. Deep in the ruins of the destroyed world, a bloodied hand immediately bursted out through the rubble. It was not the hand of a dark elf or human. It was the hand of a god. And that is going to be what if Thor was killed by the Destroyer in the first Thor movie. Now, I didn't really go in depth with Avengers 2012 as I wanted to kind of, give a little bit of different backstory on what could have happened within Asgard, because there's so many questions. If Loki was in jail, that means 2012 would never have happened. So things would have been very differently because Loki would have been in prison, so therefore he never would have gone to Earth. So does that mean the Avengers never would have been? It does call for a part 2. Would you guys like to see a part 2? But it does really showcase what would have happened. I honestly do believe that something would have filled the void, and I believe that would have been Thanos. So who knows, would Thanos invade Earth in 2012 instead of, having Loki's help with the other? It would have been very interesting. Or would Thanos have hired, Ronan to gather those Infinity Stones? So then again, it begs the question what could have happened. It's another famous what if that I'm really glad to have done, finally after after all these years, people wanting me to do, what if Thor was killed in the first installment, it was a very interesting take, and I'm very glad that I was able to make it happen. But that being said, my fellow watchers, if you guys do enjoy these videos, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have a fantastic day.